let's talk a little bit more about the Anthropic thing, because I think it's really interesting, and what you pointed out as well about just kind of funny that it's like the US is cracking down and China's dropping all the open source models, presumably to shrink the moat of these big US based players. Like that would be the, seemingly the geopolitical angle there, right? Is like, hey, let's push to just make it so that these guys have a vanishingly small moat. And yet, so it's going to be harder for them to raise money. It's going to be harder for them to justify those valuations because so much of this is open source. Like they don't have the monopoly on this, or a small monopoly on this. So, but can you talk a little bit more in depth about what kind of happened there? Basically, we're at this point where it seems the government was like, hey, shut off access to this to foreign nationals, right? But then it was just like, but it's like, well, how do you determine who's a foreign national? Well, it's the same with the UK's under 16 laws. Like, how do you determine who's under 16? Well, you ID everyone. And so like what we're talking about now, and obviously like Anthropic already had a certain amount, all these companies, like if you pay for their services, they have a certain amount of information on you, right? But we're talking about something different here. It's like a requirement of entry to be doxed at a, national identification level versus just, hey, here's your, your credit card or however you don't want to pay. Credit, all that stuff can be linked back, but still it feels like this is something different. Can you explore that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think you got most of it right. Right, the ostensible reason that the model was pulled back was that the administration said that they wanted to implement export controls and keep foreign nationals from having access to this powerful capability that might be used nefariously against the U.S. government. And obviously, the challenge, as you just alluded to, is that how does one prevent the access to information on a nationalism basis, right? Like based on your citizenship. Like, again, that's kind of like saying like, here's the library. Everyone can have access to this unless it's, this person and this, kind of nationality or something. And then we need you to pull those books off the shelf. But they can still access the library, but they can't see those specific books. It's like, this is unworkable. You can't have a library and operate it in this way if that's what you're going to try to do. And so, yeah, I think that this is, again, from a civil liberties and like a freedom tech or, cypherpunk perspective, this is really scary. I mean, this is like really concerning that the US government thinks it can reach all the way down to we need to KYC AML you in order to perform effectively a Google search, right? Like to ask a question. Right. We need to know your identity to know, why you're asking that question. Right. And that you can be tracked everywhere. And so, yeah, I think that, this was an enormous wake up call for everybody in Silicon Valley over the last couple of weeks. I mean, it's really interesting. I've been kind of an outspoken sort of open source and cypherpunk believer, for a long time out here, and maybe obviously because I'm a Bitcoiner, but for a long time, I got almost no purchase on that argument in Silicon Valley. There was a really old generation of, kind of the original .com guys who, grew up and they were, the Linux generation and, the original cryptography wars. Like those guys were hardcore. They got it. They understood the value of open source. But like kind of in the last 10 or so, maybe 15 years, like a lot of the second or third wave of Silicon Valley were too young to understand where we came from and the importance of this fight and what was going on. And it really was like this last week where tons of, open claw operators and, kind of otherwise unopinionated software people woke up and were like, wait a second, like the government can just come in and take this away with, no recourse, no clear guidance and framework, and I might have been running my business on this model, right? Like I may literally rely upon access to this new tool in order to operate my business and get my income and pay my rent and feed my family and, have a life, And so for the government to reach all the way down in and just turn that off, right? I think was an enormous wake up call to people to say, oh, wow, like it finally touched them. Right? The lack of open source options finally became real to people in a way that it hadn't before. And so, man, there was just a flurry of people trying to figure out, okay, how do I move on to open source models? I can't countenance a world where I can just be, I mean, imagine if you could just have the internet, access to the internet turned off arbitrarily anywhere you are in the world, right? Like at a moment's notice, and you just couldn't access the internet. Well, what if you're in the middle of a journey where you're relying on, the map that requires internet access? What if I mean, again, these are very like first world problems today,
Yeah.
but people have learned to live in this way, right? Like, what if you're relying on a live translation, right, thing that is required, and you're in a foreign country, you don't speak the language, and like, now what, right? It's kind of equivalent to the idea that a kill switch in the car. It's like, well, what happens if you're, you know, trying to get out of your farm and get away from, a tornado that's ripping across, and the kill switch just activates in your car. I mean, these are very profound, uh, consequential changes in what it means to live in a free country. And that it really, I think, just came out of nowhere. It came out of left field and really like slammed into a bunch of people in Silicon Valley in the last week. So yeah, I think the reality that people are coming to is like there is a real imperative for open source, and open source weights and models, and kind of the sort of access to intelligence, universal access to intelligence. We're going to need to have an enormous debate about this in this country, and frankly, it's going to have to happen a lot faster than it's taken for the crypto or the Bitcoin debate to percolate in Washington. And if past history of waiting 15 years to get to the tortured kind of suboptimal conclusion that we seem to have arrived at in Bitcoin legislation or crypto legislation were to be mapped onto the AI debate, man, we are in for a lot of pain and trouble moving forward. And again, frankly, I would say like the biggest concern there is that by doing so and doing so slowly and poorly, negotiating our way through the policy implications and like what needs to happen, we're really kind of handing the game to China, because China is not slowing down, right? They're not stopping, and they've taken an open source approach to the market and the distribution. So at the exact moment that the U.S. government is pulling back, access to the leading American frontier model from everyone, not just Americans, but literally everyone, China is charging full steam ahead, and they're going to push even harder, and they're going to, distribute their models and try to make them the standard. So I just don't see this as being effective for the U.S. geostrategic interests, and it's certainly not in the interests of individual free Americans who just want to access knowledge and technology, and to do so, in the way that we would expect to be able to as Americans.